2023 Lunch and Learn of the Iowa Geographic Information Council. Today we have a part 2. It's a sequel. Hunter Ray with Cloudpoint is going to be talking more arcade. And I will put a link into the part 1 that was in January and on our YouTube channel that you can go back and view. I'll make sure and include that when I send the link out to this recorded. And it is a reminder that we are recording this video. So if you want to view it later or rewatch it, share it with someone else, feel free to do so. We will put it on IGIC's YouTube channel. And I always say this, and I like to remind people, if a topic comes to you that's you would like to see done as part of their Lunch and Learn series, I would encourage you to reach out to myself, to Josh, to anybody on the IGIC Council. They will get me the information. Tyler Danielson has been a great help in coordinating these also. I don't want to ignore him for that. Thank you, Tyler. And so I will turn it over to Hunter. And oh, one more thing. If you have any questions, you can, I assume it's okay with you, Hunter, that people interrupt or kind of pop in. If you're not comfortable or if you don't have access to a microphone, please feel free to put it in the chat and we'll make sure that it is brought to Hunter's attention.
Yeah, yeah, especially in this part too. Speak up. I don't have a full hour probably. I want to leave. I'm going to try to do maybe 45 minutes and leave 50 or 15 minutes at the end. So you guys can kind of ask questions. And so if it's not urgent, please wait until then. But if it comes to you while I'm talking, put it in the chat. I would like to, if I don't cover all the questions at the end, I'll hopefully get a copy of the chat and answer anything and send that out maybe when Micah sends the video. So with that said, we're gonna just go ahead and jump in. Oh, I can't share my screen. Can Josh, you have to give me something? Change my permissions maybe?
Yeah, on its way.
Oh, there we go. All right, thank you. All right. So we're gonna move this. So I've just kind of revamped the PowerPoint I used at the beginning on part 1, but just for those of you that maybe weren't here or have slept since then, this is kind of what we covered in part 1. It is out there on YouTube if you want to watch, but we just went over kind of overview, where to use it, how to use it, and then I got into some demo stuff. And then, so if you want to learn more about this, kind of the overview of that stuff, it's out there on that YouTube video. So we got into some very basic stuff about the profiles and the function libraries and the bundles that are out there, and kind of the basics of an expression, which can have global variables, which are like the arcade globals, features and geometry and map and data store. And then user variables that you can custom create, and then functions and logic. So some of those functions can be called from Arcade itself. You can create your own. And then logic, you have a few options to do some logical if-thens or when and that kind of stuff. So ultimately, you get the output of whatever you're trying to get and can put that into use somewhere. So we left it off, part 1, with this tree inventory map that I was using that hopefully provides enough of an example for enough use cases that you can kind of see how it works. And we were looking at one of the new functionalities, which is the editor form that's in the new map viewer that translates with field maps and the experience builder edit widget. So pop-ups are kind of diluted as far as like the content that's out there and examples. And I will do a little bit of pop-up stuff today, but the basic arcade functionality you're going to see today is going to provide you hopefully enough to do some basic stuff in pop-ups and anywhere else you can use it. But I'm focusing more, at least on the early part of this, on how to pre-populate some data in the editor form and how to pre-populate stuff in a pop-up. And then we're going to I'm going to jump into Pro and just kind of show how it works over there. On a layer, we'll add a quick calculation attribute rule that you can field calculate or have a calculation rule, and then I'm going to dive into a dashboard and show how you can, on the fly, create a custom feature set or a custom set of data to reference in a dashboard. And then we'll be done, and we'll have time for questions. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and dive into, bring this map over. And so we're back here. I've made a few changes in between part 1 and part 2, but the basics here, we have a tree layer, a point layer, and a parcel layer that I'm going to show how we can kind of grab some data from that. The basic functionality of referencing another layer in your map that you want to populate data from. And then we'll look at some interesting things you can do with a pop-up as far as other data layers, and even construct a pop-up URL that links to some external data. So with that said, I'm just going to dive in. Not a lot of text or slides to show. I think the demo and writing the code is going to speak for itself here. So the first thing, and where we kind of left it, I'd mentioned in part 1 that we could pre-populate the address value when we're adding a new field, adding a new tree with whichever parcel it's intersecting. We could, pull in all kinds of data from from the intersecting parcel, the fields that are available in there. We left it with, if we go back in here and look at this, we were populating I want the tree. We were populating the asset ID using, referencing the existing features and then finding the highest asset ID and adding one. So if I go back in here and I look at, if I go to the form, we can see that we have calculations on our asset ID and asset name. So again, these were where we were going in and referencing existing trees that were there, finding the highest asset ID and adding one. And then the asset name was just a concatenation of the word tree and then whatever's in the asset ID. So something that I had talked about getting into on part 1 was populating things from maybe the parcel layer. So when you drop a tree, it finds which parcel it's intersecting and adds some data in here that if we go down here to location data, some things we would like to maybe pre-populate or not rely on our users to know exactly would be maybe latitude and longitude, full address, and house number, and even city. So street and subdivision are not available in my parcel layer, but I can get full address, house number, and city. So how would we go about doing that? Well, if we look at some basic functionalities of Arcade, and I should probably open that up, you can see in here that, let's go to the functions. So we know, remember we talked about kind of starting with a function library. What sort of function is this? Is this a data function? Is this a feature set function? Does it require geometry? Well, when we're talking about, maybe we'll just start with the first one, latitude and longitude. Those we would assume, if we looked at the libraries here, those would probably be in the geometry function. So as we go through here, we don't necessarily see a specific return the latitude or longitude. But if we know that the geometry of the feature can be accessed, we would assume that the geometry X and Y could also be maybe returned in part of that. So if we look here at geometry, we can see that they've already got an example of what you get when you're looking at a point geometry function in Arcade. So if we use geometry $feature, that's going to return an array or dictionary that kind of looks like this. It's got an X value and a Y value and a spatial reference if we need it. So if we go in here, we would think, all right, if I can access the geometry and then get to the X and the Y, that could be used as two separate functions to populate my latitude and longitude. Something that would be generated on the creation of a point and also be reactive to moving a point. So we're going to go in here, and this is again my editor form in the web map. This is where you would construct things that you want to happen in both field maps, and if you have the editor widget in Experience Builder, it's going to respect everything you set up here. But I'm going to click my latitude field, and I'm going to go to Calculated Expressions, and I've got a couple on here just in case things don't work out on the fly. But I'm going to say Add new expression. And the first thing, again, give it a name. Always good to give it a name. And then we want to, what did I click on? Latitude or longitude? We'll just say latitude. So this is, you can give it something like calculate latitude and click save. And this one's really easy. We're just literally going back in here, like we said, using geometry feature, and then we know that that is a dictionary, and we just want to get the X value. So this one, without any comments or anything, we can do it really quickly and say geometry, and then the $ feature of the current feature, and then .x. Now, if we test this, we would expect to see the geometry, the X value. Now, this is in Web Mercator, so that's not really, the decimal degrees I think I was hoping for, or how I would want to use it later. So now I'm like, okay, how do I convert this to decimal degrees? And aside from a quick Google search, you might think, well, I need to somehow manipulate this and see maybe I can use one of those functions that I talked about that the user can create. So not something that Arcade is going to do by default. It can give you the X value, but if you want to convert that to something like decimal degrees or latitude and longitude, then we're going to need to do something a little bit more creative. Now, I cannot take ownership of this function. This is out there on the Esri community, but I use it all the time, and I want to show you guys how easy it is to use, especially if you just copy and paste it. So I've got this again. I talked about at the end, saving your Arcade expressions somewhere other than the web map or wherever you're actually putting them into production. I keep mine as local files on our computer in our OneDrive, and giving them the JavaScript extension. If you're using an editor like Visual Studio Code or even Notepad++, something like that, that can reference and kind of give you some dynamic feedback on the styling, can make it a little bit easier to read and follow along. So this is one I have saved locally. It's a JavaScript file, and I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste. This is a custom function. We're using the function word to kind of create our function. Get that going, and then we're just going to copy and paste. So copy. So we know this doesn't work, so I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that. It got me there a little bit, but I need to do some formatting and kind of get this working. So how this works, again, I did not create this, but it's just taking the geometry, so we're using it down here in meters to lat long, and then again, we're using the geometry of the feature, and we're getting that X and Y value, but we're going to use this function to use an origin, or the origin shift and all that stuff that you need to kind of get things in latitude and longitude. So this function right here, I'm going to call it, and I'm going to say meters to lat long, and then the return value is a list with item 0 as latitude rounded to 6 decimal points, and item 1 is the longitude rounded to 6 values. So one function that returns both pieces that I would need, but in this case, because I'm only calculating it on the latitude field, I'm going to actually create variables for each, but then at the very end, I'm going to say, even though these are both created and available here, I just want to return the latitude. And now, if I test this, so this is what we got with the Web Mercator, the default X and Y. And now I'm going to go ahead and test this, and I get a different value. So this is, equating to, 40.792, whatever. So now if I go in here and I do this, this field is going to automatically calculate the latitude. So because you can't reuse code necessarily, it has to be specifically assigned to the field, in this case, I need to return another explicit value. So I'm going to actually just go ahead and create or duplicate in this case. And I know I just need to go in there. I've created an expression that's pretty dynamic, and I can just quickly change the return value to say return the longitude, and now it's available for use in my other field. And I'm going to give it a different name and go ahead and click OK. Well, first I'll test it. So now I've got the longitude value, and it's really, the X and Y was great, but with a little custom function that I've created, or someone else has created and I'm putting into production on my side, I'm able to create the longitude and latitude values that I need. So again, ultimately, this is just to streamline our data collection, make it easier for our users, and ultimately those of us that are managing the data on the back end and doing stuff with it, checking it for errors. By using this, we have the latitude and longitude already filled out whenever somebody adds or moves a point. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And now if I were to add, I've got another tree. Let's put one, I don't know, put one in this parcel. There's one right there. I'm going to go down here to edit, click the tree. I'm going to add one. And now our previous functions that we made are working. This is the fourth tree I'm adding. So then it concatenated tree-4. And if I scroll down here, in my location data section, you can see my lat and long are already populated. So seems to be working. I'm going to go ahead and click create. Oh, and I need to pick, I don't know, Norway maple. I got to fill these out, and now I can create it. So there we go. Everything's looking good. And I'm going to go ahead and go back in here. So latitude and longitude, we've got that figured out. Looks good. Seems to be working. Now, the other piece of the data, if I open this up, was street address and so full address and house number, if that's available in my parcels, or some other intersecting data or something that's in my map, and then city. So if I look at this parcel, I can see that we have address number and we have the full address or the street address, and we also have city available to us among these other fields. So the next big thing in this workflow of pre-populating and getting this editor form to kind of do what we want to do without the user having to do it is using some geometry and an intersects function and accessing another layer in our map, the feature set associated with that, and querying out those fields of data that relate to where my tree feature is. So again, before you start diving into this, go ahead and look at these and think of all maybe the different ways that you're going to need to construct this code. You can always Google, and I do it myself all the time. Like, hey, has somebody else done something like this? Because I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel. If I can find at least an example to get started with, but in general, I know that I'm going to need to access a feature set of the layer on the map, the parcel layer, and then I'm going to find some way to filter down to the parcel that I need or the parcel that my point is in using an intersect function. So I know that by that, I'm going to need to probably use some sort of maybe geometry and look up, all right, so intersects looks good. We can do something like this and return hopefully a feature set and get some sort of related data to the parcel that it's sitting on top of or intersecting. So there's a few other things we'll get into as we write this, but those are my basic things. Drop a point, intersect the parcel layer in my map, and return one or more fields of data that I want. So I'm going to go back in here and say, all right, well, I need to go back to my forms builder and scroll down to we'll just do full address. this code is going to look the same, just like longitude and latitude, where you're just kind of changing what's inside of it to, the basics are the same: access the parcel layer, return a set of fields, or one field in this case, and then when my tree is intersecting, return that current parcel or that intersecting parcel's value to my form here. So we're going to go down here to calculate expressions again, and I'm going to add a new expression. And so if I wanted to find the nearest address, so we have to account, at least initially, for what if I drop a point that's not intersecting, right? So maybe I want to get the nearest address, not necessarily the intersects. Now you can do both, you can set it up either way, but in this case we're going to go ahead and open I have an example just in case, and of course it's not opening. So if I went in here to start my code, remember we want to first access the feature set, access the layer of parcels, right? So my tree layer, I'm writing this on. I want to first get access to the data that's in my parcel layer. So the first thing we would do is create a new variable that's called parcels, and it's going to be the feature set by name. That's the function, and you can remember you can always get these examples over here in the function list, and it'll tell you if one's not available in the current profile. But for this form, we can see that feature set by name is available. And the global that I want to choose, or the place I want to look for my layer, my feature set, is going to be the map, my current web map. And then I'm looking for the layer called parcels. So with just this alone, I've now accessed the feature set of my parcel layer, the attribute table with or without the geometry, right? So that's how I'm going to get access to the features attributes that I want. But like I said in part one, when you're creating feature sets in expressions, you want to always constrain the fields of data that you get as much as possible. Returning the entire feature set and all of the fields that you need is going to be very costly and make things very slow. So it's always best practice to not just stop at the global of map and the name parcels and return that entire feature set. I only need, for this, I'm doing full address, I only need one field of data. So I'm going to say that I need the field full address. And off the top of my head, I cannot remember what the name of that field is, but with this cool editor, I can actually go look that up without leaving this editor. So I can access my map and I see there's a layer called parcels. If I click this, it tells me what the name of the fields are in this layer. So I see there's one called street address. It's like, oh yeah, that's the one I want. That's going to correlate with my full address. And so I'm going to call street address and say that's the only field that I want to return. So I'm going to get a column of just the street addresses. That's my feature set. And then this last piece is, do you want the geometry? Ironically, one little thing in Arcade, when you're running an intersect, you don't need to return the geometry. So I won't get into why, but for some of these functions, you don't necessarily need a geometry available in the feature set. So, all right, so parcel intersect. Now I've got my feature set. I need to run another function and use this feature set and my current point feature and say, all right, now just minimize that feature set to, if I can spell, what is intersecting my current feature, right? So I have a column of street address. I want to minimize the row of the column to only one row that matches the parcel that my point is in or within 50 feet of in this case. I want to allow for maybe a tree that's in the right of way or something. So I'm going to intersect my parcels feature set, and then I'm going to, instead of just using the feature itself, I'm going to use the buffer function within this and say buffer my current point feature 50 feet. So now in theory, what we're doing in the background is every point that I'm working with, my tree point, I'm creating a 50-foot buffer around it, and I'm finding one or more parcels that intersect that buffer. In some cases, it's going to be more than one. So now I've established my reduced set of the feature set to hopefully be maybe 1, 2, or 3 rows of just the street addresses of those parcels. Now, the next thing you want to do is figure out, well, how many parcels were actually counted in my buffer, in my intersection. If it's 0, then you want to do something like return a value of unknown or null or something. So we want to incorporate not only the geometry functions and the feature set functions, but now this is where we get into some logic. If something, then do something else, do something else, right? So I'm going to go ahead and say, all right, so if I count the parcel intersect, if I spell this right, intersect, there we go. If I count this, then it's going to tell me how many rows or how many parcels are intersected, right? So now I've got a variable that's going to be a number I can evaluate against. And then I'm going to say, and I'm just going to copy and paste this so it goes a little bit faster, but if I find one or more, and this is for a different one, I need street address. So what we're doing now with this logic is if the intersect count variable is greater than 0, return the first one. Now, when we get into the first, if there's more than one, which one is actually first in the row depends on your data. Usually it's sorted by object ID, so it may not necessarily be the closest within 50 feet, but there are ways to kind of evaluate distances, but it's very costly. So in this case, we're just going to return the first one if there's more than one. And I'm going to return just the street address value. If it's not, so if it's not greater than 0, if nothing was found, then just return unknown. And again, we're going to give this a name and say calculate street address. I think I might already have one named that, so we'll see. And let's see if I can save this. All right, calculate nearest street address. So I'm going to assign this, click OK. Oh, what? Oh, that's because this. Okay, here's again, always test before you save. It's going to tell me something's wrong because I'm using different variables. Now, if I test this, oh, now there's something else. What did I break here?
Is street address misspelled, Hunter?
Oh, is it?
Top line.
Oh, yeah.
I got to give Rachel that. She's stuck in the chat.
Yeah.
I just didn't want to interrupt your flow. You were doing so well there.
What did I?
You also misspelled your variable name.
Oh, which one?
Tassels. First one.
Thanks, guys. See, this is why it's hard to write code on the fly.
Oh my gosh, don't you hate spelling in front of everybody?
I have it over here that's done and works, but I'm trying not to copy and paste everything. So this is part of the learning experience. So Arcade doesn't tell you misspelled something, so sometimes you got to really take a close look, but it'll at least tell you which line it's on. So all right, thanks everybody. So this works now. My misspelling has been fixed, and we're getting a value of the street address. So now if I go ahead and save this, whenever I add a new point feature, I would expect to see I'm labeling these parcels by this value so we can kind of check and make sure everything's right. But if I go over here, I don't know, I need to find, let's put one over here in 1411. If I go down here and say edit, and I add a new point feature, if I scroll down, we see the full address is already filled out. So latitude and longitude full address filled out, looking good. And we could continue on and modify that code. We were just returning the street address value. Well, you could just duplicate that expression and change on just 2 lines the fields that you want to return in the feature set, change that to, I don't know, maybe the city if I wanted to do this one. And then you just have to change it where you're actually returning the first intersects attribute of city instead of street address. So always good to keep that in mind if you're writing code, and as you get more experience with it, try to make it as malleable as possible, as easily to duplicate. But it's it's just, you know, ways you can reuse code, as much as you can reuse as possible is going to make your life easier. And again, when you're reusing and sharing, always save this stuff somewhere on your computer or a shared drive or something. Save it as a text file or a JavaScript file or something. Save it somewhere that if this web map goes away or becomes corrupt or something, you're not going to lose the code that maybe took you, half hour, an hour, 2 hours to get to work. So always keep that in mind. So now we've done that. All right, we've got some cool stuff. So let's leave the form calculations behind and let's look at, I'm turning myself up here. Let's look at just some quick things we can do in, I don't really care. Let's discard that. Let's look at some things we could do in a pop-up using Arcade. So let's reverse course and go to the parcels layer. So maybe I want to be able to click on a parcel and in this pop-up see how many trees are within a parcel. So we can use the same sort of functionality when we're looking at our parcels and say, reverse the feature set is now going to be, that we're looking at is going to become the trees, and we're going to do maybe the same functionality of an intersect, and we're going to just return the count of the trees that are intersecting that feature. So we're going to go in here to our pop-up, and so we're leaving the form expressions behind, and we're going to go in here and say attribute expressions, and you can see I've already got one here. So I'm just going to show you for the sake of time. We walked through this on the other one, but we have a variable of trees where we're calling the feature set again in our map, our web map, and we're using the name of the layer. Now this is dependent on the name that's in your content. So if you change trees to tree points, this is not going to work anymore. So keep that in mind. But and we're returning a field of global ID. You could return any one because we're just counting. Again, don't leave this blank because it's going to return all the fields and you really don't need any of them. So reduce it to one. Pick one. It could be object ID or city or street ad or asset ID, something in the trees layer. And then we don't need the geometry because we're just running a quick intersect. So then down here, I'm going to I don't have a buffer on this one. So I'm just going to find trees that intersect my parcel feature. So we're running an intersects function. We're intersecting the trees feature set that I've defined up here and finding which ones intersect with my current parcel polygon feature. And then we're looking at the count. So we're counting how many rows are in this feature set. Now remember, this looks like basically an attribute table of the data of your parcel layer with or without the fields that you have defined. So we're just counting, basically counting how many rows, how many trees were found, and then we're returning that number. So if I go ahead and run this and test it, we see the number is 0. So if I go down here and click done, it's not available yet in my pop-up, but I'm going to go ahead and add this to my fields list at the bottom. And I'm going to see trees and parcel. I'm going to click done. And now when I click on this feature, this polygon that's already highlighted, you can see that my trees in the parcel is returning 3. So now if I clicked on this one, we would expect that to change to 1. So just a quick demo of using Arcade in the pop-up to do more than just concatenate some strings or something. But do keep in mind if you're the speed and the complexity of your Arcade functions, especially in pop-ups, can really kind of reduce the load time. So be careful, always test what you're doing. Sometimes it might not be worth the user experience to provide some of that data. So just be cognizant of that, because I've written some pretty cool stuff and then I actually test it and it's so slow, all the functions that it's doing, it's not really reliable or enjoyable for the people using the web map. So just keep that in mind. But this is a pretty quick and easy one. It gives us some interesting data that we don't have to do on our own, and we can use this in an array of ways within the pop-up if we wanted to get creative. So now the last thing I wanted to cover for pop-ups was what to what do we have to do to get you know, some sort of URL? So for those of you that have used hrefs or the anchor tag in your pop-ups before, the new map viewer, it was pretty easy to do, but I want to show real quick how you would create that new hyperlink in here. So we're going to add a piece of content that's arcade. And you can see here, it's already set up to kind of streamline, say, hey, place your text or HTML here. So you need to add this arcade item now if you want to use arcade to produce your pop-up URL or a custom HTML piece. So I'm going to show you real quick. Again, I'm just going to copy and paste this because it's very basic stuff, but I'm returning the type text, and this is where it said, hey, put your HTML in here. So I have an anchor tag and then the href value, and I'm returning the URL of a pre-made URL that I have that's going to an Amazon S3 bucket that has a PDF of the inspection, maybe a historical inspection that I did on paper back before I was using GIS to do this stuff. And it's constructed dynamically using the feature asset name. So that was, you know, tree-1, tree-2, tree-3, corresponding to the name of my PDF. And then it's going to be called the tree report, right? So I'm sure most of you have seen this sort of setup for an anchor tag, a hyperlink in your pop-ups, but we're going to go ahead and make sure it tests out okay. All right, it's returning something. Now I'm going to click done. And now at the very bottom, and this isn't pretty or anything, but I have this hyperlink that I can click. And so what it's doing is it would be redirecting me to a URL with a dynamic tail end on that URL that matches tree-1. So if I click this, it's going to automatically take me to my Amazon bucket that I've set up just for this demo. And it's public, and I can go ahead and see, all right, this is returning the single file, the PDF that's named tree-1 in my bucket, and it shows me historical information or PDF. Could be some sort of you know, construction plan or something, but I just wanted to touch on that real quick because the way you get these new arcade functions with HTML put together, you got to use this new arcade item here to, if you want to use arcade to enhance your HTML or build a table or something like that. So I just wanted to show that functionality real quick. And now I've got a few more minutes here, so I want to show, I'm going to leave this map behind. I'm going to save it, and I think it's pretty well developed. We could always add a little bit more, but we have to draw the line somewhere. And I'm going to go ahead and see if I can open Pro. And I have a web map or a Pro project that I'm going to show you real quick. You know, we've done a lot in the web map, but I do want to show that you can do the same sort of functionality in your Pro project. So if you want to do it on some data here, I'm going to open this up. I've got just a file geodatabase with hydrants and address points. And so we're going to loop back around to pre-populating data on the hydrants from the address points, just like we did with the trees and the parcels. So if I click a hydrant, you're going to see that it has an address field here that I would love to calculate for every existing hydrant that's in my data. So if I go here to the attribute table, you can see all my address data is null. I'm going to just select a couple of these so it doesn't take too long. And we're going to go and look at how do I, again, find the nearest hydrant. And again, this is create a feature set, matching your layer that you want to reference. In this case, now it's going to be the address data, address points. Give your buffer a distance around your hydrant, say 50 feet, because you can see they're not all real close. So again, that's a dynamic thing you can change as you go along, and we're going to run this at 50 feet real quick and see what we get out of it. And then that buffer is going to intersect my address points, if any, and if more than one is found, it's going to return the first intersecting address points field of address, that address attribute, and if not, it's going to return unknown. So I'm going to copy and paste this, and I'm going to right click and say calculate field. And I'll make this a little bit bigger so we can see my expression type is arcade, and I'm going to paste this. So again, the same thing, editor window, just like in the web map. I've got my address points that I'm creating a feature set. I'm only returning one field to minimize how costly this is on performance and time. No geometry. My buffer distance is set to 50 feet. I'm running an intersect, and then I'm counting the intersects. And if there's more than one, I'm returning that first intersect's address value. If not, return the value unknown. Just like you can test in the web map editor, you can click this checkbox and it says, all right, expression is valid, and I'm going to click OK. And now, interestingly enough, we're getting unknown for 6 of the 7 features. So if we look at that, it's like, well, all right, what happens if I go back in here and I open this and I just quickly change the buffer distance to, let's say, I don't know, 80 feet, and I click run. Now we can start to see that we're quickly starting to get more and more values. So just a quick way to run the same type of functionality in Pro when you want to calculate some values and you want to get more specific than just like typing in a number or a value. We've got a whole function, a whole expression here that's running a bunch of different things, all working in Pro. And so you might say, well, it looks like, what if we go to, 100 feet? Is that going to give me more? Hopefully. And now all but one. So, if you ran this on your entire data set, you might find that the sweet spot was, 75 or 80 feet for most of them. But you also want to be careful going too large because that'll get costly on your performance and you may not get the right address. So, the other question I get a lot is how do I get this as an attribute rule? And we're just going to quickly take that same code and use it as an attribute rule that's going to work all the time. So I don't have to manually come in here and field calculate this. I'm going to go to data design on my hydrants and I'm going to say attribute rules. And now that same code, that same expression that I used to calculate the field is going to be the exact same thing that I put in here in this attribute rule. So I'm in the calculation attribute rules type. I'm adding a new rule and I'm going to give it a name and say nearest address. And I'm going to say finds nearest address. And then remember, we're assigning it. We have to assign it to a field, just like we do. This is kind of the same workflow as that form editor and adding those calculated expressions. We want it to populate the address field, and we want it to use the same code that we just tested in the field calculator. So we know it works. We just want to make it automatic, and we want it to happen every time we insert or update a hydrant. So you probably aren't moving many hydrants in this case, but we're just going to set it that way either way. So I'm going to click save. You would optimally test it. I'm going to skip that because we know it works. And now, if I went in here and I added let's find, I don't know, some address we can see. So if we put a new hydrant in here, we would expect to see 401 East Jefferson populate automatically in my data. So if I go to create and I add a hydrant, say it's right here, and then I click done. Now if I go to the attributes, we can see it must not have been within 50 feet. Well, what if I go ahead and move this, and now if I go back and look at my attributes, it's hopefully within 50 feet, but you can see there we go, it's already populated with the data. So this is where you have to get creative and know where and how to fix and easily modify your code. But we would probably say that attribute rule needs to be maybe 100 feet. And then if we drop a point or move a point, hydrant, it's going to fire and give us that value that we're expecting to see. So just a real quick glance at what you can do in Pro. Once you get your arcade knowledge and expertise nailed down, it can be extremely powerful all over the place. Like we said in part 1, it is everywhere. It's not just in ArcGIS Online. It's in Pro. It's in field maps now. So it's your web maps are great with pop-ups and all that stuff and symbology, but for those of you that are more pro-centric in your day-to-day, you know, it's available here in the same type of way. Symbols, symbology, labeling, attribute rules, field calculations. It's super powerful, and it's all over the place. So, oh my gosh, it's 12:50 already. Well, I guess I'll stop there and let there be some time for questions. But um, yeah, I mean, I could go for hours on this stuff, but I got to stop somewhere. So, um, hopefully you guys are, after a couple hours of this, you've learned some stuff, and you know, I heard from a couple people at the end of part one that it maybe just gave you the ability to kind of get over the hump and not be so, I don't want to say intimidated, but like, where do I go to do this? Where do I learn what's available? How do I do some very basic stuff, right? Like concatenating text, or the one I just showed where you're in the new map viewer and you need a custom URL in href tag. So, you know, it can be overwhelming, but hopefully this has kind of opened the lid a little bit, or giving you the little jump start you need for a new pop-up configuration, or if you want to get really advanced. I've hopefully shown you what you can do with the editor window and the forms and the new map viewer that will propagate over to field maps and the experience builder editor widget. So, do I need to look at the chat? We got some questions.
Let's see here. Lots of accolades. Hunter, talk about the availability of the editor based on which version of Portal or ArcGIS Online you are using.
The editor, which one? Oh, the forms, the editing in the forms, like the map viewer.
Dave, can you pipe up?
Oh,
What's your
was it?
question?
Get this open.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, basically,
Uh,
I just wanted to elaborate. Like, me and one of my coworkers noticed, like, obviously in our portal, since we're like a version behind, we
Right.
don't have the latest and greatest that Esri releases with their current release of AGOL. So you might not be able to do the same things on your local portal if you're running portal versus what you could do in the current version of AGOL.
Yes, that is a great point. So ArcGIS Online is kind of at the forefront of what I was showing with the editor, the editing forms and the calculated expressions. ArcGIS Enterprise 11.1 is coming out, expected to be released March 30th. That, for those of you using Enterprise, will get you to that same level of being able to use calculated expressions in field maps in the map viewer, and it'll take your experience builder deployment to the next level that matches ArcGIS Online, where if you know have some web app builder stuff that you're using with the editor widget or the smart editor, migrating that to experience builder and using that new editor widget that respects all those form settings that we showed in the map viewer is going to really be like that's the future of all this stuff kind of coming together. So yeah, unfortunately Enterprise right now is slow. It's killing me because I can't wait to get some of this stuff going for some of my clients with Enterprise. But you know, March and April, let's say April, you know, if you're ready to upgrade to Enterprise 11.1, that'll get you to the functionality that I've showed. But to that point, I wanted to show real quick, and we showed this in part one, but when you go to the ArcGIS Arcade page, there is the, where's that? Profiles, and then, I'm sorry, home, and then version matrix. So with just the forms and the editor and stuff, that map viewer stuff, that is limiting those of you with Enterprise. But the functions available within Arcade are also dependent on your ArcGIS Enterprise server and your runtimes and Pro for some of this stuff. So um, if you're going to start using this stuff, and you get some weird errors in Pro or something, if you're on maybe a later version of Pro, or you're not in, you know, 10, if you're still in 10.7.1 or 10.8.1 ArcGIS Enterprise, you're going to be pretty limited. But at 10.9.1, you have access to a lot of stuff. But you can see here at 11.0 and 11.1, there's already been 5 releases of Arcade, updates to Arcade to give you that enhanced functionality. So always good to keep in mind. Esri, it's not all available everywhere, but they kind of get you with some of this cool stuff you can do in ArcGIS Online. So any other questions?
I did want to mention, Jay piped up a little preview. He is going to be talking from Silent Geospatial. Geospatial is the thing to have in your name. I noticed that Silent did a name
Very,
change.
very cool.
He will be presenting along with Matt and I think Amy is what Jay meant to write there. They're going to be talking about some arcade tips in relationship to GPS data collection, and they will be covering the Z expression in depth with that. So there's a little preview of some more arcade coming down the road. And I also want to mention that next month's I almost said next month's Arcade Lunch and Learn. No, it will not be on Arcade. Our next IGIC Lunch and Learn will be on adding R in our studio to your workflow, and that's going to be presented by Jay Maxwell and Christopher Seeger at Iowa State. They're going to be presenting on that, and I will be sending out information on that in the next couple days, probably after I get the video sent out for this recording. So just want to make sure that any other questions coming from anyone. Last time, Hunter, you were the most requested email I had for several days after your presentation. So I'm kind of curious to see if I get that again.
Well, hey, I'm happy to do these. I love sharing, what I've kind of learned over the last couple years with Arcade, and ultimately just hopefully getting some of you over the hump and showing you it can be confusing and complicated, but some basic stuff is not too hard to get going. So
Well, you filled
you
up
guys
2
are doing.
hours. You could keep talking. Believe
yeah.
me, I am keeping this in the back of my mind for some future presentations. So we really appreciate all the information. And I think the biggest thing we've learned is to always cut and paste if possible. That's what I'm taking out of it.
And presentations, yeah. I describe it line by line, but yeah, I gotta speed it up somewhere. But yeah, save your code somewhere else. That's another thing. It really sucks when you lose your entire code because you lose internet or something. So
Exactly. So, and if there's some more specific uses of Arcade that you'd like to see in the future, I'm talking to everybody there, please let me know and we'll try to hunt someone up who can do that. I could see maybe a couple cases of literally just sharing code and helping with some very specific use scenarios, possibly kind of like a roundtable kind of thing. I'm just kind of brainstorming here, but we'll just have to see. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining our February 2023 Lunch and Learn, and we will see you back here next month.